like this is making him more popular than what needs to. I don't know.
We are now streaming on Facebook, y'all. Good evening, everyone. For the beginning of our process here, I'm going to have to find the link on the headquarters page so everybody on my page can see what we're doing. So bear with me for a moment as I look for that. But anyway, while I look for that, I just wanted to say greetings, everyone. This is Cleo Monago. I'm here with Duke Porter and Nkashama Sankofa, and working on the production side is Adam McMath. And we also have Nathaniel here, whose name is on the screen, but I'm not sure we're going to see his face or not. And because of popular demand, because I wasn't going to respond to this, we're going to talk about Billy Porter's commentary. Now, at this point, I have not seen Billy Porter's commentary. I'll be seeing it for the first time during this actual live stream. Again, I'm trying to find this whole thing on my page, excuse me, on the headquarters page, so I can put it on my page. So pardon me as I look for it. I don't see it yet. I hate doing this, but what can we do? So why don't you, brother, say something? Say something to the people out there.
I'm also sharing at the moment, but I'm Duke, for anyone that does not know. I'm a poet and organizer here in Baltimore, and I work with Cleo in the Amasi Center.
Who else is on this line?
Y'all. So I believe most people who watch the live stream know my name is Nkashama Sankofa. Humble freedom fighter.
All right. Well, most of us,
we pulled this madness up. Have we pulled this madness up yet?
We will. Oh, okay. I found it. All right. Yeah. And thank goodness for Anthony, because now once I do this cut and paste, I don't have to be bothered anymore with any kind of other extra duties beyond just talking. Okay, let me turn the volume off his computer.
So I haven't seen the clip myself yet, or the video. I did see some parts of it that were shared, and of course people have been talking about it, but just to be clear, everyone here has not seen this video, right?
I have not seen it at all, and I was planning not to see it. But a lot of people, including young people, kept asking me what I thought about it. And then when person number 37 asked, I said, okay, let me do something, but I don't want to do it by myself. I want to do it with other people because I'm not into the talking head thing. And so I was able to ask you brothers, and here we are. And I've just posted it to my page. I'm going to start.
Next time we do something like this, it needs to be a happy hour, though.
Yeah. Anyway, now I can focus, everyone. Again, this is Cleo Monago. And as I said a moment ago, I'm here with Duke Porter and Nkashama Sankofa and Adam McMath. And Nathaniel's with us, but we can't see him, but we know that he's there because we're going to hear his voice at some point. And we're going to be discussing Billy Porter's commentary. I have not seen his commentary yet. I've heard about it. I've heard that it's apparently particularly interesting from a Black perspective, but I will see. So I will be seeing this for the first time, and possibly if I want to react to something, I'm going to ask Adam to stop it so we can talk about a certain section, and then go to the next section. We will see, but let me brace myself because as I told Nkashama in one of our previous conversations, I don't have to see the content to know what happens when a same-gender-loving, gay-identified Black man who's embraced by the white community and who also up under white gaze, literally at home and in their professional space. And when they start going off on Black people, it's always the same kind of anti-Black implications. And that's what I fear was going to occur. But I'll see for myself. Maybe he's going to come out being the SGL Huey Newton. I guess I'll find out for myself in a moment. But Adam, why don't you roll it, please? Here comes Billy Porter.
Hey everybody, Billy Porter here. And this is my message to America. Malcolm Gladwell's debut book, The Tipping Point: How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, first published in 2000, defines a tipping point as the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. The book seeks to explain and describe the mysterious sociological changes that mark everyday life. As Gladwell states, ideas and products and messages and behaviors spread like viruses do. And epidemics are sensitive to the conditions and circumstances of the times and places in which they occur. So with that said, there's no doubt in my mind that we as a nation are at a tipping point, the tipping point, one that has been heating towards boiling over for hundreds of years. Our basic human rights, our Black bodies have been used as pawns for political gain since the beginning. So just a little history lesson for everybody, just so we're clear. Number one, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. The motherfucker sailed over here on Miss Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria and stole this land from the indigenous people who were already here through violence, disease, and genocide. Number two, this country, as it stands right now, was built on the backs of my ancestors who were in fact stolen by force from their homeland and forced into slavery. Slavery, that is the foundation of America. This country was built on thievery, violence, genocide, and slavery, period. So I find it disingenuous when my well-meaning white liberal allies, news outlets, politicians, faith leaders, and all of the rest of my Caucasian compatriots act as if this shit is new. Ain't none of it new. You know it, and you all benefit from this ancient privilege simply by being white. This is why nothing has changed. Let me rephrase that. Things have changed, but nothing has changed for good. So please, please keep your white, I didn't do it fragility to yourselves and simply listen. Finally, listen to us. I want to share a little story with you about what it means to be a Black man in America. So my husband and I have rented a house out on Long Island. Some friends of mine asked for us to meet them at a farm, a hog farm. We arrive in my BMW to the farm, sprawling lands. There's a structure at the beginning of this farm that's sort of open, no real doors, but a lot of stuff is stacked in it. To me, I don't see parking, I don't see people, I don't know what's going on. My anxiety starts to rise. A little girl comes out of the barn, runs out, sees my Black ass with my white husband in a BMW, sitting on her property, which to me feels like it might be private, but I don't know. This little girl runs back in to the barn. My panic and anxiety rises so high to the point where I actually have to leave the public farm for fear that Pap is gonna come out with his shotgun. This is what we as Black people deal with every day. Every single day. I tell this story to illuminate a tragic reality that is all too real for Black Americans every single solitary day of our lives. And just to go even deeper, and Black people hear me, because y'all ain't gonna like this one. As a Black queer man in America, my basic human rights have been up for legislation every single day that I have had breath in my body from all sides. And by that, I mean that the Black community's relationship with the LGBTQ plus community is appalling at best and eerily similar to that of white supremacists versus Black folk. Hear me, Black people, and hear me well. I'm calling y'all out right here and right now. You cannot expect our demands of equality to be met with any real legislative policy and change when y'all turn around and inflict the same kind of hate and oppression on us.
Stop it, Adam.
The trap reality here is that Black.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, before I respond, because I always have a lot to say, of course, I want to hear from you all first. What's your perspective of this narrative that we just heard so far?
Well, before we even get into what he started to say about Black people, I just like to go over, the stuff that he started talking about as far as racism, and his own experience seems to be limited to not seems to be from what he says is limited to how white people treat him, or how he he mentions so many things, such as his BMW and his white husband and blah blah, as if he expected those things to shield him from oppression. And a lot of his frustration sounds like it is in regards to white people whom he interact with and are close with, who don't, sympathize to the level that he would like them to. That's what his criticism of white power and of racism seems to be limited to.
Okay. Duke, is you having some audio issues over there? Duke? Adam, what happened to Duke? He's gone now. Okay, well, while we're waiting to find out where Duke is, I'll comment. I really wasn't interested in his, his husband and his story about his white husband and his BMW, because I don't think that's the classic story for most same-gender loving Black people. And that's his story, and fine. But I believe that this video is partly, if not fully, inspired by the attack on the transgender person in Minneapolis. You think that might have something to do with it, Kashama?
I think his veering off definitely did. Yeah, and honestly, yeah, you're right, because he wasn't. He hasn't been given any energy. But these are strange times.
Yeah.
You got Nancy Pelosi wearing kente cloth on the Hill and all types of stuff going on. So it's hard for me to say whether he would have made this video, whether that had happened to Ayanna Dior or not.
Well,
who is the person that you were referring to?
I don't follow Billy Porter's career. I know that back in the day, maybe about 15 to 20 years ago, I heard him sing on some soundtrack, and he's an amazing singer. But he's never been a demonstrative force for Black people or in the Black community. Matter of fact, as you can see, his shirt says that it's gay AF, and I pretty much have seen him whenever I've seen him inside of the white gay community context with his white partner and surrounded by white people, and he has not spoken to the Black community. It seems that maybe he's responding now because there's a new attempt or alleged attempt to speak to Black issues in ways that hasn't happened before, and he wants to interrupt that or maybe add to that with his perspective of how Black people treat same-gender loving people. And there's a few things that concern me about it, but one is and at the risk of sounding too esoteric or abstract, the people that attacked that transgender person in Minneapolis, people don't know what their sexuality is or was. The assumption that a lot of gay identified people make when these attacks occurs is that is a hate crime from somebody external to the culture. And there's an implication, which is not true, that gay identified Black people and transgender people get along great and that there's no conflict. That's not true. Most gay identified Black men do not support or feel comfortable around male to female transgender people and keep their distance. Now there's exceptions, obviously, but I don't want to, but what bothers me is that there's an anti-Black implication and stuff that he was saying. And also he's talking about this based on that scenario where we don't even know what everybody's sexuality was. And there's a lot of assumptions going down here, but maybe he gets better. Does it get better as it go, or I don't know? I
don't know. It's only been downhill from the beginning, from Christopher Columbus.
Wrong.
Well, now that you're back, Blue, did you want to add something?
So I apologize to anyone who's tuning in. There was some audio issues, but when I'm in a moment like this, I really like to, as much as possible, hear someone in totality before really giving my true response. So,
all right, well, let's hear some more. Adam, roll it again. We want to hear some more of Mr. Porter.
No, he got my last name.
I'm sorry. Oh, that's what
change.
Nathaniel, we'll get to you. We can't get to you right now until we finish with this. We can't hear him. I'm not sure if I'm upset about that, but we really can't hear him, Adam. There's no volume. Still no volume.
Zoom is messing up today.
Ayanna Dior was brutally beaten by a gang.
Okay, back up some. Yeah, he's talking about Ayanna Dior. So clearly this is a response to the incident with Ayanna Dior in terms of him talking about saying Black folks are the same as white supremacists.
Similar to that of white supremacists.
Could you back that up?
Hear me, Black people, and hear me well. I'm calling y'all out right here and right now. You cannot expect our demands of equality to be met with any real legislative policy and change when y'all turn around and inflict the same kind of hate and oppression on us. The tragic reality here is that Black, trans, as well as gender non-conforming women and men are being killed in the United States by cis Black men to such a degree that it is nearly the worst emergency for trans women on the planet. The murders of Black trans women by Black men since 2016 have helped drive the most violent period for LGBTQ plus people on record. Just this past week, during the riots, during the peaceful protests, Ayanna Dior was brutally beaten by a gang of Black men while trying to peacefully protest for our rights. LGBTQ plus Black folks are Black people too. Our lives matter too. So this is my response to those of y'all who don't understand that. Fuck you. And yes, I am cussing. It's time for cussing. Y'all, this conversation is not about tolerance. This conversation is not about acceptance. It's about a demand for the respect for our humanity, like we respect everybody else's, because none of us are free till we all are free. So to my homophobic and transphobic brothers and sisters, get your fucking houses in order. But I digress. As Black people, we risk our lives every time we leave our homes. As queer people of color, that risk is doubled. We move about our days, sucking it up, hiding our pain and terror from the world, trying to make ourselves small so white people and straight people feel comfortable. Our parents try to prepare us for the realities of this world. The fact that the playing field is not level. The laws that protect white people do not do the same for us. And that we have to be at least 10 times better at anything we choose to do in life to simply get in the rooms where things happen. We had a Black president. We thought we won something. We were 8 years in power, or so we thought. I don't know if we got bored, we got complacent, I don't know. But for hundreds of years, generations after generations, we have fought. Our ancestors,
Adam.
our families fought and marched and boycotted peacefully for the.
Okay, people in the audience, if you're watching, you know, I really can't stomach this strange narrative. I thought I could sit through it, but it's so contrived and so I just can't believe a word of it. And he's reading it off. I mean, he's not even coming from a place of his own heart. And it's painful for me to sit up here and watch this. And I tried to, y'all. I tried. But what were you saying, Kashama?
Something else that needs to be taken into account. When he's talking about the oppression that Black people face in regards to being Black at the hands of white power, he is much more easygoing, and he's much more you know, y'all need to listen to us. He's much more pleading. Then when he get to Black people, fuck you, get your house and your shit in order, rah, 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 rah. Like all of that whole fairy godmother routine went out the window, and he turned into a malt liquor commercial real quick on some thug like persona. I just think that's very worth pointing out. Another thing too, this is not to diminish the humanity, the suffering of Ayanna Dior or any Black people who suffer abuse or violence, regardless of who it's from. But I saw that video, and she was not protesting. Ayanna Dior wasn't protesting. That doesn't take anything away from that person. That's just not the context around what happened. I believe Duke is also in the waiting room and is waiting to be brought in. Yeah, that's just simply not what happened. It's just a lot going on with that video, man, to really unpack, and mainly because he's all over the place, you know. And then he turns around and say, "Ooh, but I digress." Yeah, that was a hell of a digression. It was you changed the subject completely, and then supposedly got back to, you know, the issue of Black people being oppressed, and proceeded to, you know, mix and conflate everything together. And what I had to tell somebody earlier today is that when you are doing that, when you are trying to put this oppression thing on Black people, when you're trying to point out how we can be oppressors and how we can be just like white folks and how we can't ask for this or demand this when we're doing this, you are trying to delegitimize and you are devaluing our ability to overthrow our oppression and our right to overthrow our oppressors. That's what you're doing when you say that stuff. It's the same thing as the what about Black on Black crime narrative and a plethora of other you know, things that don't have anything to do with the issue of white people with their knees on our neck, physically and metaphorically, for centuries.
I'm glad you brought up the tone change that occurred when Billy started to direct the issues towards the Black community. So I think doing this work you begin to recognize patterns in people when it comes to them really trying to work out their own traumas around a particular community, and then trying to make it a political stance, as opposed to, I didn't receive therapy or resources or help for my personal issues and I did not get resolved. And so therefore I'm getting ready to blame entire communities for what's going on. In addition to that, I'm really glad we're having this discussion because for those who don't know, later on this week, we're actually going to be in a discussion with Dr. Tommy Curry, who does a lot of work around Black male studies and what is the genre of a male. And part of his work analyzes this term intersectionality, which is something that we should really get into because Billy, along with so many others, misappropriate and use this term intersectionality in order to try to put up a real trauma Olympics far as who is suffering the most abuse in our communities, when on a day-to-day basis, it does not apply to how we navigate. And quick examples of that is, there's this meme that's been going around of like a Black man that's standing in the middle with a hoodie, and like there's a cop on one side aiming a gun at him, and then there's another Black man on the other side aiming a gun at him, and one says nigger and the other says faggot, and it's like gay, queer,
yeah, I saw that.
Center are the most endangered. And not only was that meme stolen from people who were trying to talk about real intracommunal crime in general, and now has this queer narrative around it. The metrics don't match up, right? We know for a fact that you can be harmed for being a Black man just for being a Black man. Like, you don't have to add any other layers or identities or ways that you address or whatever, or what career you have. Just walking down the street, you can be harmed for these particular things. We don't have these particular movement spaces for the nerd kid who wears glasses and who's been abused and people don't like him and blah, blah, blah. We don't have this thing for our disabled community members, but there is a real agenda to portray the Black community as this super homophobic, super vile, and my preferred terminology is homo antagonism, super vile community, when that's just not the case. Like, anytime that there's different layers in which gay identified men, Black gay identified men, can talk about how they have been, how they have received less rejections in the workplace, meaning like they can go for a job interview, and the moment that they reveal that they're quote unquote queer or they like the same men or whatever else, all of a sudden all of the drama and all the inhibits around them getting the job seems to be displaced, and now they can kiki and cuckoo. And a Black cis hetero, or whatever the language is you want to use, does not have that identity to fall into in order to move forward in life. And violence just happens in various different formats in our community. And we just have to really start acknowledging that it doesn't matter how you identify in the Black community. If you're Black, you're at risk. And there's behavioral changes that we need to do as a community, yes, but there's absolutely structural colonial issues that we have yet to address, which can really benefit and behoove us moving forward. I ain't want to stay.
I want to attempt to look at Mr. Porter, Billy Porter, that is, as opposed to Duke Porter, from a compassionate perspective. I imagine that Billy Porter, I don't know what age he is, that he must probably be in his 50s or something like that, I think. He's a same-gender loving Black man who has some frustration or anger toward the Black community for not rallying around his sexuality and accepting him. He also had a career that he attempted to have before this newfound fame as a singer. That didn't really do that well, and it was primarily targeting himself toward Black people in terms of his singing. And I think that he has felt unsupported or accepted by the Black community. He's wound up feeling more accepted as a homosexual in the white gay context. And because he wants and needs that acceptance from someplace, because he's gotten it from his perspective from whites, he's less angry at them. And they don't get the fuck yous because from his perspective, they have been a sanctuary for him. The irony here is that he starts off his conversation with what Columbus did and what white folks did and how terrible white folks have been. But as you already said, Kashama, and underscored by Duke, he doesn't get angry, enraged into fuck yous until he starts talking about black people. Even when he mentions the little white girl that he perceives as possibly being racist in Long Island, he's not angry at her. He doesn't get to the rage and the fuck yous till he gets to black people. And I do think that this personal mental distress issue that you brought up, Duke, is relevant. And I think we should understand as a community, I'm talking about the black people now, some of the consequences of us not having enough conversations about our diversity along the lines of gender, along the lines of sexuality, and along the lines of gender nuance. Even if you don't see the black community as particularly homophobic, and I don't, we have not had these conversations though, and there's reasons why that we may get into in this conversation. But I want to mention to those who are listening, what happened to Ayana Dior was horrible. And what happened to other trans people is horrible. And we should do something about it. However, the implication that Billy Porter gave, which is not true, is that there's this epidemic of homosexual people and trans people getting their ass beat every day, and there's mobs chasing this community, and that's not true. What happened to Ayana is horrible and rare. Now, of course, Dior doesn't care how rare it is. They were a victim of it and they don't like it. But the black community is not in droves going around physically attacking and assaulting same-gender loving people. However, there are people in the black community who have issues with same-gender loving people, have a critique, and are not accepting. But that's true in all communities. That's true in the white community. I have done counseling with young white people who are no longer living with their parents because they got put out. I worked for years at a runaway shelter in Los Angeles that catered to a lot of homeless, homosexual people who were put out their homes, and most of them were white. So that occurs, this whole thing that has Porter saying F you to the black community, it happens to other communities. And I'm not sure his affection for whites will allow him to see that, because as far as he's concerned, we're the only people that deserve the F you. But I tried to watch his comments, and it was really, really difficult. Somebody said in our comments here that everybody should be allowed to come to the table. I agree that everybody should be allowed to come to the table.
What table?
Well, I guess he's talking about the black table.
Well, yeah, let's not assume, because I don't even know what a lot of these metaphors, we've gotten in the habit as a people of using quite vague language to describe very specific political and nuanced situations. So what table?
Yeah, so I see something else I want to address. I see a comment here from Dante Kelly, 2 comments. It says homophobia and biphobia and transphobia is an issue in the Black community. And he also raises in Black trans women are being attacked in the Black community. So I did some research. And that's the key thing, I think, is always doing research. One, we live in a homophobic, biphobic, transphobic society. So when you ask, are Black people homophobic, biphobic, transphobic, the answer is yes, absolutely, because we live in a society that produces these particular outcomes and narratives. Now, when it says in Black trans women are being attacked in the Black community, yes, that occurs. I believe in 2019, and I haven't done these numbers in a while, and please feel free to correct me, but I believe it was around 23 murders last year, specifically Black trans women specifically, across America, 23 of them being Black. However, when you look globally, and I mean all over the world, the murder rate is around, I think it came up just under 350 murders just under 350 murders across the world. And when you look at that particular narrative and understanding what's going on, it's really hard for me to identify that this is an issue in the Black community when globally we are dealing with the oppression of gender variant folk, right? When globally we are dealing with the issue of colonialism powers and structures that articulate that this is how you are supposed to respond to sexual and gender diverse people. And there's no response to that. There's no articulate response to that because the agenda has always been to paint the Black community as somehow the worst deserving of resources or management or referrals because of how it quote unquote treats its people, when the Black community routinely has shown that is the most evolved and developed when it comes to issues on sexism, when it comes to issues on gender diversity, when it comes on issues of sexuality diverse and issues of ableism, all of these different things. There's multiple studies that just show that consistently Black people happen to move the needle forward when it comes to these political issues. However, that's not the narrative that is placed on our people. Lastly, I see something, want to make sure I'm addressing these comments. Lastly, it wasn't too long ago where every year we were hearing about white kids being abused and killed by their parents because of their sexuality. That happened almost every year. There was a news article. What I'm here to tell you is that someone who's worked in the social work field is that those narratives did not go away. They just stopped being in the news. Like these narratives are still consistently popping up every month. I'm getting reports of individuals being murdered because of their sexuality, and they're not in the Black community.
Yeah. Well, I guess
I wanted to ask Duke something real quick in regards to the data that he saw. With those, you said there were how many murders of Black trans people?
Black trans people in America, I believe the number was 23 last time I checked. 23 or 26.
Okay. And how many of those murders were actually solved?
And see, that number is unreported as well.
Right. And so
what's noted to point is that not all of those murders happened because someone was angry at them for being transgender as well. Some of these murders and violences have happened intracommunally, whether it be a robbing or thieving. These particular things.
Explain intracommunity, please. Explain that term, intracommunity.
So what I mean by that is that even with inside the queer identified community, Black people are not safe. Whether it be from white partners or white white people that they are in proximity to, or the additional Black people that they are also in proximity to. When you're talking about intracommunal violence, like you have to look at it as the actual term of intracommunal before you put on all these layers of identity. Black people have been harming Black people no matter what, right? And so there's been multiple cases of Black trans women as well as Black queer identified folks who have been harmed by their Black queer counterparts, who have been harmed by their Black transgender counterparts. Like there's stories of multiple people, for instance, of homosexuals who are being stabbed and murdered by their sexual partners, who they were in a relationship for multiple years with, right? And this is the narrative of our particular community. However, when we start talking about who is the most homophobic or whatever else, now we're starting to create an analysis or a lens that says that the Black community is the worst when it comes to these things.
And see, what happens is, Duke, you will go and do this research because you're not questioning the worth of Black people. And when you hear these negative things about Black people, you have to get to the truth and the facts of this issue. So what I wanted to point out was when we were talking about how many of them are actually solved, that's another thing that's happening with a lot of unsolved murders in places like Chicago and other cities that are not around Black trans people, just Black people in general are being killed and the murders are going unsolved. And there's an anti-Black narrative that assumes the perpetrator was another Black person.
Yeah, and there's some instances, like a couple of instances in Texas where the murderer was not Black. Yeah. One was Latino, one was white. So, and then there's some other people that were Black, of course, that were involved in this too. And often these situations are intracommunal, as Duke mentioned, or between people who knew each other or know each other. Mm-hmm. The people that killed George Floyd didn't know him. And the people that keep killing Black people in law enforcement, for example, or George Zimmerman, et cetera.
Well, that's to be debated. There's reports that Derek Chauvin, the one, actually knew George, but moving.
Well, no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
They work together someplace. But typically, and we found that unusual because that is unusual. But yeah, in this instance, they knew each other. But the other 3 cops who stood around and watched the murder didn't know him. So in terms of solutions and giving some considerations for those who are watching, who are invited to join this conversation, by the way, if you look on my page, you will see the link to actually come on by video and join this conversation if you have an alternative perspective or one for us to consider.
I thought this was just a reaction video, Cleo.
Yeah,
I don't know if we got the energy to unpack alternative perspectives on this because.
Well, I have the energy in case you don't. David Hill mentioned something about there being murders in Detroit of trans people, and there's concern among young people about those murders. I'm just looking at some of the comments here. Muriel Jones said, "I question those statistics nationally and internationally, but I must do some research. But how do we address our SGL, AGL, and trans issues as an international African community?"
If I had to answer that, the first thing I would say is that it has to do with the language and the approach. We don't take into account how culturally different LGBTQ language and the structures and the paradigms that it has created really is from the African experience, as well as how different it is from the Native American experience, the Chinese experience, the Mexican experience. Like, this particular experience is very much so crafted and nurtured inside of a white supremacist bubble and ideology, and then it's created as the blueprint on how we navigate and talk about sexuality and gender diversity for the entire world. And the shit don't make sense. And there's no other way for me to like censor that, because if we're looking at the term gay, and Cleo knows this more than I do, but I believe it's like around 42 years old now in reference to sexuality,
a little over 50,
which is completely erases the ways that communities have navigated these particular topics before colonization has set in. And what I was doing just now, I don't have it with me, but I believe Sobufu Some and her husband, ex-husband, Maladoma Some, wrote multiple books that talked about how their communities navigated, not specifically around sexuality, but it included sexuality and gender diverse people when it came to the Dogon and Dagara communities. One chapter that I stand by is from Sobufu Some's book called Gatekeepers, in which she talks about the actual ways that people like us, or whoever is uniquely supposed to identify as SGL or LG, all those other alphabet soup things, people like us had actual roles in the community that revolved around the protection, the agency, and the guidance of how the community was supposed to move. However, when colonization set in, there was a reversal of those structures. There was a dismantling of those structures. And not only did homo antagonism and gender diverse violence come out of it, but so did a lot of the other intracommunal violence that we don't acknowledge at the same time. Like, all of these things happen inside of a bubble of oppression. There's multiple stuff, and again, please follow this week because Tommy Curry can also speak to it as well. But what you recognize whenever you do these studies is whenever there happens to be a colonial figure that oppresses a group of people, intracommunal violence is not far to follow. And Cleo also knows this work about the Tutsis in that particular community.
The Tutsis and the Hutus?
Yes, you know about that with that particular community as well. And we don't recognize the ways that actual colonial oppression facilitates intracommunal violence in multiple layers and ways.
So let's do something here. I would imagine that lots of people saw Billy Porter's commentary. A lot of people did. A lot of them contacted me and asked me how I felt about it. I just tried to watch it and I could barely stomach it because it was so anti-Black, so hateful, so drenched in whiteness, and so drenched in a white love perspective and a Black FU perspective, which I just don't have the stomach for. So that's why I asked Adam to stop it. I just couldn't take it anymore. But what I want us to do, gentlemen, since there's going to be a lot of people who have seen this, who may see us, what would you tell Mr. Porter if you had the opportunity to inform him or give him some guidance to make him have a reconsideration of his Black FU perspective?
Can you hear me, Cleo?
I hear you just fine.
I honestly, at his age, I don't know what the hell to tell somebody that age. Honestly, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm 34, and so I think a good 20 or 30 years ago, I could have maybe had something to say to a young Billy Porter, depending on where he was.
So what would you have told a young Billy Porter? A young Billy Porter is likely come from maybe a religious background of oppression around his sexuality.
Well,
as far as he's concerned, the people that did the direct damage to him based on his sexuality were Black, not white. Whites were somewhere abstractly on a systemic basis, which he might not even have known about, but he knows who hurt him in his home as a child. He knows who hurt him in his church as a child. He saw the video of Yana Dior get beat up by Black people.
Well, Cleo, okay, so wait, right. So as a young man, he wouldn't have seen the video of Ayana Dior. However, I do get where you're coming from, because I do know a little bit about Porter's story and his life based off of what he's shared with the public in regards to his abuse, and and just his upbringing and stuff like that. So what I would tell him is what I tell young Black people all the time who question the value in fighting for Blackness or fighting for the well-being of Black people. I tell them that you're only fighting for yourself. Whatever issues or abuses you faced at the hands of Black people, that doesn't erase you from being Black, and it doesn't stop all of the struggles that come on you for being Black. The anger that you have at Black people for abusing you, you have to realize that if you want to make a criticism against someone, you have to unpack that on an individual basis. You have to unpack that individually. A young man told me today on social media that he blames older Black men for our state. And I just had to let him know, look, you can blame any old Black man for whatever he did to you personally, and you can hold him accountable. But what you cannot do is blame Black people collectively for what is the result of white power and generations and centuries of that dynamic. So that's one thing I can explain to a young person. Someone who has gotten to the point to where Billy Porter is, to where he's at that I said what I said state in life, there ain't shit I can do for a Billy Porter. He has way more money than me, and on paper, he looks like he got his shit together to white power, or how white power would like to put it, compared to me. So a person like him could definitely tell me, there's nothing you can say to me. I got my BMW, my millions of dollars, and my white partner, and blah, 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 blah.
I personally think that anybody with the right approach can be taken out of the white supremacy trauma trance. And I believe that Black people generally are in a white supremacy trauma trance, and we're never given a respectful opportunity to self-evaluate and see how much we've been impacted. For example, we've already mentioned that a lot of the things that Billy Porter complained about happens in other groups too, and it happens among whites. But when a white child is put out of their home, and I've known white children who have been put out of their home, they never blame it on white people. We've been trained to racialize our pain and racialize our negative experiences as what Black people do. When getting put out of the home, not being accepted for your sexuality, religious persecution, etc., happens in all communities. But all communities do not racialize themselves. As I mentioned before, I used to work at the LAYN, Los Angeles Youth Network in Los Angeles, which was a shelter for runaway children, many of who were homosexual children. And the young Black children were the only children there who associated what they went through with the color of their skin. And there would be a white or Asian child who had the exact same anti-homosexual, family rejection, isolation experience, but they never ever considered it from a racial perspective. We've been taught to see things through a racialized perspective. That may or may not be why Mr. Porter is not even with somebody Black as the most significant relationship in his whole life. But that's a whole nother deduction and assumption. But I want to get back to some of these.
What I want to highlight about what you just said, though, because I think a lot of times when these discussions happen, queer identified folks internalize it to the point of being upset and like you're making this about me. But the behavior that you just exposed, far as the racializing terms, happens throughout the entire Black community. It can be something as simple as you go to a Black-owned store, or don't even have to be a Black-owned store. It could be a Black cashier and they run your stuff up wrong and you mad at that particular thing. And your first response is niggas ain't shit. And that is the way that you move and navigate about your particular Black experience. That's a racialized thing. And when you happen to have a queer identity, which is, there's no other way around it, it is layered in a paradigm that's created by white folks. This particular racializing comes with an attitude, it comes with an agenda and morals. Damian said, and I can answer this freely, as well as pose it to Billy Porter hypothetically. He said, will be the best way or the best time for the Black LGBTQ community to express that they feel that they have been murdered and ignored. And I say that it requires you to actually be involved in Black spaces so you can have those particular dialogues. Too many times, it's either you happen to be traumatized or you were in proximity to someone else who was traumatized. So you create a narrative that does not allow you to actually move and navigate with your community. You go to a queer identified space, create a quote unquote safe space, create a paradigm and a logic on how you want to navigate in your identity. And then you go back to the community that quote unquote traumatized you around issues of their own trauma, right? Because mind you, Billy Porter ain't talking to the Black community 364 days of the year. However, now, when the topic legitimately is racialized oppression against Black people, now you want to have this topic. No, it ain't the time. No, it ain't.
And say fuck you. And say fuck you.
And he was nowhere to be found when Ed Buck was having his crystal meth mad science experiments on Black men and watching them die in his home. I
don't know. I don't want to make a condemning statement saying that he didn't, but I will definitely say I didn't see it.
I'm gonna say he didn't, because a person of his platform knows how to be damn seen. At the Met Gala, he took the show. So if he wants to get something out, just like he can say "rada rada fuck you," he can get it out. Believe me. So he didn't say nothing if we didn't see it, and he was nowhere to be found. If you care so much about so-called Black homosexuals.
Well, I'm not sure, based on his narrative and based on what you all just described, which is accurate in terms of him not being around when white racist Ed Buck was using Black boys and killing them in his home. He had no comment, and he didn't say F you to Ed Buck. However, one of the ironies that causes Black people to react the way that Porter reacted is that on an unconscious basis, they're thinking, we're Black. We should understand. We should not hurt each other because we're already being hurt from external sources, and we should understand oppression enough not to do it to each other. That's the narrative that some of these people have that makes them extra angry, along with the racialization and the anti-Black implications that are in this culture that on a normal basis have Black people call themselves the N-word and being anti-Black. So what I want us to do before we end, which we're going to be doing in about 13 minutes, is get the audience to understand that within our community of Black folks, there are same-gender loving people, just like there are heterosexual people, bisexual people, trans people, etc. And that one of the side effects of the Black community being so occupied with justifiable issues like police brutality, murder, white supremacy, trauma, and race, etc., that we've neglected our own family. We've neglected going inside and having conversations about our diversity. And some of these people who are feeling neglected are going to other communities, including racist white communities, for sanctuary because they feel like they don't have sanctuary at home. And regardless of how you feel about same-gender loving people, because I'm not telling people how to feel, we need to create space among our collective to engage our diversity so our community can unify, particularly when we're in situations like we're in now, where we're being murdered, and there's people finally acknowledging it. I think that acknowledgement is superficial personally, but there's other people who may benefit from a potential transformation regarding the so-called spotlight being put on the fact that Black lives supposedly matter and all that kind of stuff. Now, I do sound cynical around that because I am cynical around that. I don't think there's been a transformation. I think that white people are covering themselves or doing CYA because they're in close proximity to Black people after the murder of Floyd, and they're trying to keep themselves safe in the midst of a potential backlash. That's what I think is going on, but that's not enough to get into because my perspective is much more dimensional than that. But I want to read another perspective here. John Young talks about the fact that Mr. Porter comes from a very religious family, had a very religious mother, and definitely dealt with religious persecution, which is part of why he has the reaction that he has.
Who you talking about again? Talking about Porter?
That John Young referenced Porter, and that he had a religious mother, and apparently there was some abuse along those lines.
Porter was sexually abused and raped by his stepfather from the ages of like, I think 8 to the age of 13, according to him. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know.
And another thing is too, I think it's important that we provide these analysis for people like Porter, so that the ones who are out there with that same breakdown, that same mindset, can benefit from something like this. But I'm of the thought process that Porter himself, in the platform that he's on, with the amount of power that white people have allocated him to use, or the use of power that white people have allocated him,
he has influence, not power. He has influence.
Excuse me. Yeah, the amount of that. Thank you for correcting that. The amount of influence that white power has allocated to him, that shit is dangerous. And we, as Black people, this is a time where we are becoming hyper vigilant, and we are becoming hypersensitive to anti-Black rhetoric, and rhetoric that devalues our struggle and contradicts our struggle to be free. And people like that are going to have to take several seats. They're going to have to be sat down by other Black people, especially other same gender loving Black people. We're going to have to speak up and make that clear that, hey, no. That crazy stuff he's talking about is the result of unpacked trauma and blah, blah, blah. That is not the Black narrative. That is not the narrative for a Black agenda for power, point blank. Well, and he's not the only Black person walking around hurt and confused and crazy. And it's not just the same gender loving Black people. That stance has to be taken. Poor Candace Owens, she's as crazy as two left shoes.
Well, what I was going to mention, hold on a second, because we got to end this at some point. But I just want to.
My point is, with someone like that, you know what I'm saying? I'm comparing her to Billy Porter. People like that are going to have to be shut down, and it's only because of the platforms they have and the influence that white power is using them to utilize.
Well, one point I want to make before it's over with is that it's difficult to shut down people who white people give a platform.
Oh yeah.
It's difficult to shut down the TV, now unless you just turn the channel, but it's difficult to shut down a Candace Owens and a Billy Porter, because Billy Porter and Candy, this is my perspective, audience, some of you might be offended by this, but Billy Porter and Candace Owens are household names because they're weapons for white supremacy. And they create the image of, or the mirage of inclusion and Black diversity, when the reason we know who they are is because white people said, okay, we need more Black people. That's going to create confusion, and that's going to create the image of Black acceptance, regardless of how white people act and what they do. This person will say F you to Black people. Candace does something similar to Black people, and they're needed inside of the white supremacy agenda canvas because they do destructive work that benefits white people. So what we have to do is teach our community to decode them, because we don't control the Caucasian Broadcasting Network, CBS or CNN's Caucasian News Network, or all but Caucasians, ABC, all these Caucasians.
My use of the term shut down wasn't literally shut him down.
Oh, I know, I'm just saying. I know
definitely
you would.
that
I
narrative.
didn't expect us to go grab them and throw them off the stage.
Yeah.
I'm just bringing up the issue of decoding.
Right.
Because that's the best that we can do in a society that, regardless of how many white folks are in the street and how many white folks supposedly care about Black Lives Matter, et cetera, whatever, we still have to come home to a lily white supremacist media system that helps to co-sign the mentality of the likes of a Billy Porter who tells Black people F you, and the likes of a Candace Owens, whatever she said. I didn't hear what she said because I don't listen to what she says, just like I didn't listen to Billy Porter until people kept trying to drag me into this, and that's why we're having this conversation. But we need to understand that our media is biased, and our media is always looking for the next Lil Wayne, the next Kanye, the next Candace, the next Billy Porter, and there'll be others coming. We do need to learn to demand, since we're putting white supremacy on blast now, we need to demand the press stop doing that. That's a whole other conversation. I don't want to confuse things. We need to demand that the press stop bringing in decoys, white supremacist Black decoys for white supremacy.
Because Billy said a lot of
that
things.
Needs to
but
be
it's
the
only
next
one thing making the headlines.
That needs to be the next place and the next frontier that Black people address. But anyway, y'all, my phone is blowing up. People keep calling me. And even when I ignore them, they think that it's time to call again. So I'm going to leave. I think that you're all able to have a little bit more conversation if you like with me being gone, I hope, because I think you should continue if you want to. But I have another speaking engagement at 8 o'clock, and I got to get to it. So I'll let you and Adam and you all do whatever you're going to do with this conversation in terms of how it ends. And I'll see you all later. Thank you, people who signed in. There's several of you, and I see a lot of comments still happening here. And folks are calling folks coons and stuff, which we need to not do. That's a white supremacist term. I call them IWACs, internalized white accommodationists. But anyway, I got to go. Be good, sisters and brothers. Kashama and Duke are going to continue the conversation until they prepare to stop having the conversation with Adam's support in production. I'm out.
All right, peace, Cleo.
I don't have too much more to say other than, of course, promoting for this Saturday's discussion. But I did see some more comments, and I really want to, if Damian is still here, he also asked, but are they being accepted when they go into these spaces? And the thing that I have to say for that is that, one, there's no guaranteed if I operate a certain way, then certain behaviors or things won't occur or happen to me. However, there is a thing such as intention as cultural cohesion, right? Intention and cultural cohesion. The moment that I had stopped reflecting on my life as some kind of victim inside of the Black community, I began to navigate with my people differently. And then I was also recognized I was treated differently inside of my community, right? I had heterosexual Black men see me from across the street with dangling earrings, like open and hold the door for me. And that was something that was not possible before, while I was thinking that my community was going to harm me, right? Two, cultural cohesion is about really knowing about yourself and about the community as a whole. I don't know if Kashama is frozen for me, but if you know about your community, you can talk to your community differently, right? I have dialogues and discussions with plenty of brothers and sisters who thought themselves against me at one point. But I was able to educate and navigate with them. And not everyone is called to do this work. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that everyone has to be some kind of leader and forefront and in an expert in de-escalation protocol and recognizing that's not everyone's role. However, when you are in a position of leadership, then be a leader. Then make sure that you are creating the space for not only yourself, but your community as well. That's just called upon you. And I take that very specifically, again, from So Bufu Some's work, where she talks about the idea of gatekeeping and how to navigate and really work and be an asset to your community. One thing that I know that the Black community sees that we are hypocrites of is, when I say we, I'm talking about the LGBTQ identified community, is inside this community, you will hear talk of the racism that plays out 365 days a year, right? You will hear about how white people are evil and bad, and they treated me like this. They didn't want me in their bars, and they are sexualizing me, or they don't want to sexualize me. All these different things. You hear all about the racism that occurs. However, every year around Pride, these are the same banners that will be flown up. This is also the same community that you will get other Black children to go to for quote unquote safety and representation. But you don't have a lens or idea of trying to make it work with Black people, but you absolutely do try to make it work with white people. Am I lying about that, Kashama?
No,
You're not lying,
not.
but hold on, brothers, hold on. I have some obnoxious news. I came back because my next event needs this same Zoom interface that we're using right now. And I thought that I could somehow magically make that not be the case. But I got to kick y'all butts out because I have to use this interface to join a conversation where I'm speaking in 4 minutes.
All right. Well, no peace. Have no problem. Have a good peace. All right.
I'm sorry, audience. Duke was bringing us to town with what he was saying.
Very good point.
And I'm sure that Kashama was going to bring even more genius. But I have to ingeniously end this because I need the interface for my next interaction. And people are bringing me to death and getting on my nerves. And I have to focus on that. So thank you all for watching. You all can continue on Facebook, and continue this conversation if you like. But the Zoom piece has to end at this point. And thank you, Adam. Thank you, Adam, for your assistance. You were very helpful. And good night, everyone.
Bye.
We'll talk later.